starting. So if you turn to Daniel chapter 7, we are through with the historical narrative part of the book. And now we're into the bit that, quite frankly, makes very little sense if you look at it just straight up literally. Because Daniel is having visions. And you know when a prophet starts having visions, at least one thing needs to happen when you're reading it. And that one thing is, you have to understand, he is trying to describe the indescribable in human language. So with that in mind, we start out in the first year of Belshazzar. Now we know, of course, we've looked at Belshazzar. He was the one who was holding that banquet, toasting idols with the vessels of the Lord. And in his first year, Daniel sees a dream. He writes down the dream and told the sum of it, and this is basically my paraphrase of what he wrote down. He saw a churning sea stirred up by the four winds of heaven, and out of the sea come four beasts, and these beasts are bizarre. One of them was like a lion with eagle's wings. One was a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth and a hunchback. One was a leopard with, again, wings. And then there was a 4th beast. And this one apparently is not like any known animal on Earth. It is described simply as terrifying, dreadful, exceedingly strong, with iron teeth that devour, break in pieces, and ruin whatever's left. And this has many horns, 10 horns, in fact. And then another one pops up, which had to have been a really, really weird point in the dream, because this one pops up, uprooting 3 other horns before it, and then it starts talking. So you can see, this was not a restful night's sleep for Daniel. But after this horn sprouts up and it starts talking, he sees thrones set forth, and the Ancient of Days sitting to judge. And the Ancient of Days judges this beast and its talking horn, and judges the rest of the beasts, and then one like a son of man comes before the Ancient of Days, was presented before him, and is given, and this is I will actually directly read this part, dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So this is the description of what he saw. And of course, Daniel, in the middle of this vision, is, it says, anxious and alarmed. Well, understandable. And so he approaches someone who's nearby in the vision and asks what this is all about. And he is told these 4 great beasts, okay, the winged lion, the hunchback bear, the winged leopard, and this weird monster are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. Like, but, what about that 4th one? The 4th one really weirded me out. And he says, you know, the 4th one will be a kingdom different from all the other kingdoms. But you notice what still happens. Though it is violent and destructive and boastful and rebellious against the Most High, still he shall be judged, and his dominion will be taken away and given to the people of the Most High. And the reaction to this, in the vision, Daniel is alarmed and anxious. When he comes out of the vision, he is greatly alarmed. But he keeps this in the back of his mind. It says he keeps it in his heart. He's basically pondering this. Because in the middle of this, right, he hears these words. He, talking about that one talking horn, shall speak words against the Most High and shall wear out the saints of the Most High and think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand. For a time, times, and half a time, which is kind of a repeated motif. This time, times, and half a time. We're not really told what that means. And people get really sidetracked trying to figure out what it means and trying to specifically predict what this refers to, how long it is, and when the kingdom shall be given over to the saints. But what's the point of this vision? The point of this vision is that these kingdoms do not arise without the knowledge of the Most High or outside of his control. And that though they may have power over God's people for a time, times, and half a time, it's a measured time. And it ends. It ends not through any human method, but through the judgment of the Most High. And there is a kind of what in old days they called cold comfort, where it is comforting to know that these things will end, but not so much to know that you have to go through them to get to the end. Like some of us who like to skip to the end of a book to see if it ends well before we continue on through the really hard bits of the story to make sure it's worth it. He tells us it's going to be worth it. But you have to go through. Not around, not over. Through. And there's a second vision. This is the third year of King Belshazzar. And in this vision, he sees a ram and a goat. But not any ordinary ram and goat. The ram is said to have two large horns, both set high, but one higher than the other, and the higher one sprouted last. Unusual. And no one could stand before him when he charged. No one could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. And then after him comes this male goat, and he came across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. Okay, we have a flying goat. That's not weird at all. And this goat, it becomes enraged against the ram, strikes it, breaks its horns, and the ram has no power to stand before him. So just as no one could stand before the ram, now the ram can't stand before this goat. And no one could rescue the ram from his power. And the goat becomes exceedingly great. But when he was strong, his single horn was broken and four came up in its place. And this thing about, horns and sprouting horns and talking horns, and very distracting. But what happens in the end is that one of these horns persecutes the people of God, overthrows the sanctuary. And it says, will throw truth to the ground and will prosper. And of course, one holy one speaks, and another one answers, how long? And he says, 2,300 evenings and mornings. And of course, people latch onto that number and say, okay, so how long is this? When is this going to happen? How long until it ends? But Daniel, having seen the vision, while seeking to understand it, sees someone standing before him. And a voice calls out, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. And you know this is one of the messengers of the Lord, because when the messenger approaches, Daniel falls on his face on the ground in a deep sleep. And Gabriel touches him, makes him stand up, and says, I'm going to explain to you this vision. And this one's really specific. The ram with 2 horns are kings of Media and Persia, and the goat is the king of Greece. And this is where things become so specific that some scholars insist it must have been actually written after the fact, because no one could possibly know ahead of time so much detail. Except if you go into Isaiah, which we have, and see where God says, I declare it before it happens so that you may know that I am the Lord. And the reaction to this one, right? The first vision, Daniel is greatly alarmed, but he keeps it in thought and carries on. This, he is sick for some days, sick and bedbound, appalled by the vision. But the part of this that I really want you to focus on, right? He's having these visions of the future about these empires, these kingdoms that are going to come. They're going to be warring amongst themselves, warring against the people of God. The one thing you find out in all of these visions is that the people of God become utterly insignificant as political powers. And for someone who is hoping for the restoration of Jerusalem, that is not a good thing. But Daniel is reading scripture. He is specifically reading the book of the prophet of Jeremiah. You know, Jeremiah, before all of this happened, while Israel was still a political entity, spoke through the Lord saying that a certain amount of time must pass. And Daniel is reading through this and he realizes that this is 70 years. Now, he was a young man when he was taken into captivity. At this point, we figure he's got to be somewhere between 70 and 80, which means the time is starting to draw near that Jeremiah had predicted. So Daniel begins to pray. It says he turned his face to the Lord, seeking him by prayer and pleas for mercy with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. We're talking full out, dedicated prayer. And we get a text of the contents of these prayers. And it contains a couple of things that I think we really, really, really need to pay attention to. First off, the confession of sin becomes part of a contrast of the greatness and righteousness and faithfulness of God contrasted with us. And he goes through and he says, all of us have sinned. We refuse to listen to your prophets. All of us, our kings, our princes, our fathers, all our people. To us belongs open shame. To the Lord belong mercy and forgiveness. And it goes back and forth between, we sinned, but you remained faithful. You have kept your word. We have rejected it. And then it moves into, for your sake, Lord, according to your righteousness, let your anger and your wrath turn away from your city, Jerusalem. Hear the prayers of your servants, not for us, not because of our righteousness, but because of your great mercy. Don't delay, not for our sake, but for your sake, for the sake of your name. And I can't help wondering, because this happens in the first year of the Medo-Persian Empire, after that great banquet, where the name of the Lord was mocked by all of those who drank out of the sacred vessels of the temple in honor of their gods. And he gets his answer. And he sees Gabriel again. And he says, you are loved. And when you started to pray for mercy, command came to me and I was sent to answer you. And he says 70 weeks, or literally it's 77s are decreed about your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. And he goes through, there's, again, very distracting 62 sevens and another, 2 sevens and week and half a week and all these things that people start figuring, these are specific numbers. We can figure out the answer. But here's the problem. He gives just enough information to assure Daniel that this is all within God's plan and control, but not enough that Daniel could sit down with whatever kind of calculator they had in those days and work out a specific answer of when will Jerusalem be restored, which is what he really wanted to know. Do you know why God does this? I will tell you to go back to Acts chapter 1, because something very similar happens there. When the disciples say to Jesus, when will the kingdom be restored and given to us? And Jesus' answer is, it's not for you to know. The nearest that the Bible comes to the modern saying, it's none of your business. Your concern is to obey, to serve God, and do his will until the promised time comes. It's not your business to know when that time is. In fact, some of us, when we know what a deadline is, we procrastinate and say, I have until then to work. I think it's really wise on God's part not to tell us when. But anyway, back to Daniel. He has another terrifying vision. And this one, he's actually out in public during the day. He sees a man clothed in linen, but no ordinary man, with, a body like gems and a face like lightning and eyes like flaming torches. It's like, all right, now we're into this whole, I can't describe this in normal language, so I'm going to say it's like this, but it isn't actually like that. And Daniel alone saw the vision. He says, the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves. So I was left alone and saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. And this is the bit that distracts people the most. He had been in mourning for 3 weeks, full on, fasting, no lotions or anything of luxury, praying, probably about what he'd seen in Gabriel's answer to his other prayer. And what we find here, amid all the other distractions, is a reassurance, another reassurance. Again, somewhat cold comfort. Because the man he sees touches him and sets him trembling on his hands and knees and tells him to stand up. It says, from the first day that you set your heart to understand, this is chapter 10, verse 12, and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days. For the vision is for days yet to come. What you find here is a mirror. The conflict that is happening on earth is reflected from a conflict that is happening in heaven. And we can get all distracted by thinking about, guardian angels and archangels and all kinds of, we don't talk about spiritual warfare much in our tradition, mainly because there are too many traditions who have gone and taken it well outside of its bounds. And I think our reaction is probably a little bit of an overreaction, because it is true that conflict on earth is merely a reflection of what is happening in the spiritual realm. But here we have the powers of evil able only to delay, never able to stop the power of God. And their power to delay is limited. And what he fears for his people on earth has a spiritual root. And he's given visions that are so incredibly detailed that it almost is a narrative. You could just pop in a few names from the Ptolemaic and Seleucid dynasties, and you would have a history right here. It is freakily accurate. Again, which is why people sometimes say, well, this must have been written after the fact. It's too detailed. But for those who believe in an all-knowing and all-powerful God, that should come as no surprise. What does come as a surprise to us more often than it ought is that when he starts talking about the end times, he's just not specific enough. Because again, we start looking at the future. And if he's this specific about the future, why can't he give us times and dates? People keep thinking. Because after you get through with, the Ptolemaic and Seleucid dynasties, you have an entire chapter at the end of Daniel, which could apply to almost any time. There shall be a time of trouble. Verse 1, such as has never been seen since there was a nation until this time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sun above, and those who turn many to righteousness like stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And we hit this point where we're like, okay, got it. People will be delivered. There'll be a resurrection and a judgment. That's great. But when? And Daniel is no different. In the middle of all this, he says to the one who's explaining things to him, "Oh, my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things?" And what is he told? Verse 9, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end." And the book itself ends, "Go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days." He never tells Daniel what he really wants to know. When is this going to happen? How is it all going to unfold? You can almost hear the angel saying, "We've been through this already. We know how this is going to unfold. People of God will suffer, will be persecuted, but in the end will be delivered." And I think it's significant that twice it says, first in a command, shut up the words and seal the book. And in the second, as a statement of fact, the words are shut up and sealed. We are being told again, that bit is none of our business. But go your way. In other words, go about your business as you need to, in obedience to the Lord your God. And the reassurance is, you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. There is a place prepared for Daniel. It's allotted. Before he even comes to it, it is set aside for him. And throughout Scripture, we are assured. Go back to John. I am going to prepare a place for you.
Don't forget about the human empire.
Because let their hearts be troubled. Because I have told you, and it is so. Now, we have no way of knowing how the future is going to unfold for us, where we stand, what to expect. More so right now than usual in our lives. But we have been told what really matters. And what matters is the time that we are to know trouble has been limited by God. And there is a place allotted for us so that at the end, we will stand. And that, more than any timetable or guesses at the schedule of the future, is what really needs to shape our choices, our actions. Because we don't know, and we shouldn't know. I firmly believe we shouldn't know. But we have been told what we need to know. Go your way until the end. For if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. I love how scripture interweaves. So that's Daniel. He lived a long life and never again saw his homeland. But I don't think it's any coincidence that his book of prophecy ends with the assurance that his place in God's presence is assured, is reserved for him. So we'll be going back to Ezekiel for the next couple weeks, because there is a lot left to look at there. Some of it almost as odd as the visions Daniel has just had, and some of it deathly boring. I will be honest with you. It's the kind of thing you read if you're having trouble sleeping. But we will make it through, because God reveals himself in all manner of ways. And as some people like to say, all scripture is inspired, but it is not all equally inspiring. But we are commanded to know it and love it. And that's my challenge for the next couple of weeks, to make you love it. So I am thankful that as many of you as have remembered the time change and joined us. And I think we will be holding this time for at least the month of June. Again, we don't know. No way to tell. But act as if that's the truth.